It takes time for questions at the end, but we've always cut off by 9 o'clock sharp, so we will keep you on time and on your way for your day today. So without further ado, if we could welcome Jennifer Capps, the Vice President of Curatorship and Exhibition.
Good morning. I'm going to have to keep myself in check this morning because I have more information to share than I probably can share in 10 or 15 minutes. But we are this morning talking about Benjamin Harrison's grandchildren. So I will get right started here with the oldest grandchild, which is Benjamin Harrison McKee. He was born March 15, 1887 in Indianapolis, Indiana. Contrary to some of the newspaper articles and in fact his obituary, which I saw, that said he was born in the White House, which is not true. Born in 1887, so it would have been a little difficult for him to have been born in the White House. Probably born actually in this house. So, but here in Indianapolis. So kind of have a little timeline for each one of the grandchildren. So, looking like at census records, we find him in 1900. So we're, obviously you probably know that the 3 grandchildren all went to the White House with President Harrison, the 3 oldest grandchildren, and are living with them in the White House. So I'm jumping forward, and we're going forward kind of in their lives. But in 1900, in the census, you find Benjamin Harrison McKee with his parents and his sister, Mary Lodge McKee, and they are in Saratoga County, Saratoga Springs, New York. So they are in New York at that time in 1900, and J.R. McKee, their father, is listed at, as an occupation at the General Electric Company. It's a little hard to discern what is handwritten in the census record, but I'm going to say he was listed as commercial or logistics department. And later he's also listed, he's with the General Electric Company, with other electric companies through the years, and was in a management type position. So again, they're in Saratoga Springs, New York in 1900. In 1905, we have records for Benjamin Harrison. They are traveling, so Mary Harrison McKee, Benjamin Harrison, the daughter Mary Lodge, traveled at that time. So we know that their port of departure was Southampton, New York, and came to New York. So through the years, you see these records. If you happen to be like on Ancestry.com, you can see when they come and go with different ports of entry, what ship they were on. We also have some passport records I'll share as we go along too. So younger photographs of Benjamin Harrison McKee that if you're a docent or have been around, you've probably seen images similar to this of Benjamin Harrison McKee. Also on the table, I'll talk about those things as we go through at the end too. You might not have seen these photographs of Benjamin Harrison McKee. So Benjamin Harrison McKee went to Yale. Starting in 1906, he was a class of 1909. So he's a graduate from Yale. Then in 1910 census, we find him in Manhattan. He's actually living on West 72nd Street, again with his parents and sister. And at that time, his father is listed as a manager at the electric company. Then we have his 1916 passport. And on the left-hand side, you see the description, his photograph. There's a first page that I didn't share. The right-hand side is actually an affidavit signed by his mother, Mary Harrison McKee. So you can see her signature down there at the bottom stating that he was born in Indianapolis and is a U.S. citizen, that kind of thing. So that is his 1916 passport. And then it lists that he's departing, he's going to Liverpool, and he's going over to Europe. So World War I, as you might know, when that time period is going on. So he joins the American Red Cross and is going over to work with the American Red Cross. So April 5th of 1917, he marries Constance Elizabeth Magnet, who is of English descent. So he met her in England. They then travel together. She is also working for the Red Cross at different times, so they're traveling together in Europe. And then we have his 1918 passport. And you can see the little photo down there, but of him, and he is listed as a banker. So he does financial and banking, broker type things for the American Red Cross. And then in 1919, his passport says he's traveling to France, England, and Switzerland. So traveling through all of those areas. The 1920 census lists him, so our U.S. Census lists him as being with the American Red Cross in Europe, with the military and naval forces with his wife, Constance, and lists his occupation as a banker. So in 1921, they have a daughter that is born. Her name is Constance Patricia Celine McKee. She is born March 31st, 1921. And this particular map is of Paris, of France. They were living where the little red dot is the street address. So that was 32 Boulevard Inkerman, Paris, France. It's a kind of a suburb of Paris. I think on there somewhere, and I have to find it, you have the Arc de Triomphe, if you have a reference to that. So not too far from that, so in the heart of the city there. So that's just a reference, and this is the Google Street View of what that looks like today. And the building across the street was still there at that time too. It was a school. So then in 1925, they're traveling again back from France. They arrive in New York. They go back and forth quite a bit through the years. 1925, 1928. His mother dies in 1930. They're traveling again in 31, 32. 34, they're listed as living in Paris. And 37, they're traveling again back between New York and France. And in 1937, we actually have a letter addressed to Mr. Batty here at the site. He was the early director. So this one, actually, I'm sorry, this is the birth record for the daughter. That is Constance, his wife. Unfortunately, I do not have a photograph of his daughter, but that's his wife. They're traveling back and forth. So in this letter to Mr. Batty, again, he is living in France, but he says that they're selling the house at that time. And so they actually, as descendants and in the will, have to sign off when Mary Lord sells the property in 1937. So he's telling Mr. Batty that his address is in Paris and that his sister is living at Berkeley Lodge, or Berkeley North as they called it, in Greenwich, Connecticut. And that was, again, the McKee home in Connecticut. So they were living in New York a little bit earlier, but as the children are going off, Mary Harrison McKee and her husband go to Connecticut. So this is actually, these are 2016 photographs of Berkeley North. It sold in 2016, or was for sale in 2016. And on the table there's one photograph we have of that house when the McKees lived there as well. So they're traveling again back and forth. Baby McKee, or Benjamin Harrison McKee as he would prefer to be called. In 1940, he's actually listed in New York City at the census, living at the New Weston Hotel at 50th and Madison Avenue. But in 1935, the census again listed him in Paris. He actually shows up in a draft card with his residence as Connecticut, at the home in Connecticut. But they're just going back and forth quite a bit. So in 1956, his city directory actually lists him at 14 Field Point Circle, Greenwich, Connecticut. But he dies in France. And actually this is the other address that showed up for him in Paris as well. So he did move a couple different locations there, but this is a little bit further south of where the other one was. And again, the street view of the building. And he passes away April 1st, 1958 in France. So you can see the obituary here on the left side, and then kind of the diplomatic, since he died, was a U.S. citizen who died abroad, the paperwork that they filed. And they do say that they're bringing his remains back to Connecticut. Unfortunately, I'm not sure where he landed. I'm still looking. I don't know if he was actually buried in Connecticut for sure or not. His wives, his first wife dies actually in 1954, and he does remarry. His second wife, Marcella, is French, but she actually passes away in Arizona. So his first wife dies in Florida. So I'm not quite sure where Baby McKee ended up. I had some references I was looking earlier, so we'll try to track him down for sure and that as well. And then we have Mary Lodge McKee. Again, she's with her parents. We see her in the same census with her brother. She marries in 1913, excuse me, Kurt Rieslinger. And they have a daughter in 1915, Edmie, which is a family name, actually from the Bush side of the family, which is Anheuser-Busch, by the way. That comes to her father's side of the family. So she shows up, and then they have another daughter in 1919. They show up in the 1920 census in Manhattan. Unfortunately, they divorce in 1922. So then in 1930, she actually is living in Connecticut. So again, that's where she's in the home in Connecticut in those 1930 years when, again, Baby McKee was writing in 37 that she was there. At some point, they must sell that home. She ends up again in 1940 in New York City, living on 54th Street. And she dies March 2nd, 1967. In New York, and she is buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. So that is Mary Lodge McKee. And then we have Marthena. And again, these are probably some photographs of Marthena that you might not have seen. The goat photo, you have the 3 children. So this is her when she's a little bit older. So Marthena